Great to see you too. This is going to be a good time.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with the legendary Michael Theroux of BorderLands. Mike is a pretty impressive character. Not only is he a level 67 Arch Aether Mage from his experience running BorderLands research, but a, he's also a level 45 monk slash warrior. For he's also done professional MMA, and he's also a master musician, level 45 or 47 bard. Excuse me.
The only thing is that I'm not familiar with these levels.
Well, you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, many years ago.
So
Many years.
you remember how the stat system worked out? Like it was from like 3 to like 18, but it could go all the way up to 25. But 18 in anything was like super gifted. Like if you had an 18 intelligence, you were up beyond genius. If you were 18 strength, you were superhumanly strong. So
That was a long time ago.
I played the remake Baldur's Gate. It used on the PC. It used the Dungeons and Dragons rules, and it's just a superb role-playing series. The company that made it was started by two doctors from Canada. One was a neurosurgeon, and these guys just made the best video games, the best role-playing games I ever played in my life. They were brilliant.
I've never actually played the role-playing games. Most of the things that I played were, like I was saying earlier, the first-person shooters. Just because when you're in the game like that, it feels it's one of the closest things to a virtual reality situation that you can get, and the only thing is that it tends to really mess with your head, and I would try and go to sleep at night, and the game would actually continue to play on, and I realized that this was actually rewiring my brain, and I wanted no part of that, and I stopped doing it. So there are people that say, these things aren't affecting people, they aren't affecting the kids that are playing these games, and I absolutely have to disagree because I experienced some pretty crazy stuff myself.
I would agree with you, especially now, like these games like Call of Duty, they're even more intense and even more focused on just pure homicide. It's like
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think if you're an older person who's experienced a lot of things in life, it might be easier to take and might be a little bit easier to dismiss what's going on in these games. But when you're in your formative years, I think it can jack into your brain and it starts rewiring things, and your synapses are going to start misfiring, and that's when these people go off and go absolutely insane. Not to mention the pharmaceuticals that they're on, helping their cause. So
yeah, 25 grams of psychotropics doesn't help the situation at all.
right. And I got to say, at this point in the conversation, I had no idea we were going down this path, but it's kind of interesting.
It's a hell of a world we're living in. We're seeing things change so rapidly because both of us have had a foot in the analog era, and now we have another foot in the digital era. Like, so we've seen the transition very clearly happen. That gives
Right.
you a very unique insight.
Well, if you look behind me, I don't know if you can see it. That is a 1956 Hammond M3 organ. That is completely analog.
Wow, an organ.
Yeah.
Bach.
Well, this is more like a jazz organ, if you will. But I mean, everything in there. I mean, this thing is completely mechanical. It's got physical wheels that turn inside it that are tone wheels, and so for every key that you press, you are creating the tone out of a mechanical function. There is nothing digital whatsoever going on there. And I've done a lot of research into the whole analog versus digital idea. And, I mean, even down to the idea that when you look at your watch, for instance, when you're looking at an analog watch with the hands and the time, you see a geometric pattern that is imprinted from centuries ago that actually gives you an idea and a relationship between what time it is now and what time it's going to be. Let's say you have to do something at 9 o'clock and it's 5 o'clock. All you have to do is glance, and it's right there. If I look at this watch, and I wore this watch specifically for this purpose, I don't know if you can see it. It's completely digital.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at that, and it says 9:49. So I'm thinking, okay, it's closer to 9 o'clock than it is to 10 o'clock, when in actuality it's 10 minutes to 10. If I'm looking at an analog dial, I immediately recognize, wow, I'm very close to 10. It's just a simple experiment that you could do. You can actually do this and prove it for yourself.
Wow. Wow, that's an interesting insight. I'd never think to look at it that way.
There are other things in the analog versus digital realm that are interesting too. For instance, old vehicles. We used to always have to turn a knob to, let's say, turn the volume up on the radio. And what do we do today? There's a button that we push, and to make it louder, we push the button, and we see a little graph on a screen that goes up to tell us what the volume is. So there's no sensory thing going on there. Nothing sensory whatsoever. You're just pushing and you're looking, and you're supposed to be driving and looking at the road, whereas in the past, you would turn a volume knob, and you didn't have to look at it to tell where it was at. It was a sensory thing. And eventually, you would acquire the sense to know that you didn't even have to listen to the volume. You knew where that knob should be. Completely sensory, completely analog.
Wow.
So there's all these things that have become digitized, if you will, and they're taking away, and actually, and many people agree with this, that they're rewiring our brains in the process. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but I still prefer to stick to the analog.
I agree with you. I think we can all pretty much agree it's not good.
Yeah. And then if you get into music, I mean, analog is still where it's at, and people are still using, analog devices in music and swear by them, and especially tube amplifiers, analog circuits and effects boxes, and any number of other things. It just there's a certain natural sound that comes out that can't be reproduced digitally.
Absolutely. I have to say, one of my favorite kinds of people to talk to are musicians, especially about science, because when we start talking about the ether and all this alternative science, things can get really far down the rabbit hole, and most people can't even pass level 1. But when you sit down with a musician and you start telling them this stuff that would blow their people away and send them probably into a coma, they just nod their heads, and then they'll come back with some amazing insight on that thing. It's absolutely so refreshing and so welcoming. What is it about musicians that gives them this ability to just accept and synthesize so well without any resistance?
That's a good question. It could be defined by several answers. Rudolf Steiner, for instance, who was an anthroposophist and developed anthroposophy, and really wrote heavily about the concept of the four ethers, called one of the ethers the chemical ether or the tone ether. And so there's a whole approach to the idea of how sound travels through space, how sound is received by people, how sound is propagated in these fashions. I think that's great, but you're asking a musician about this, and I don't know if I even have an answer for that right now.
Well, you brought up a great point. I've noticed that music just sounds better at night, especially the closer we get to like dawn, when the dew is like gathering on the grass. Have you found the same thing?
Well, certainly, and there's a lot of factors that are involved there too. I mean, I can go into a club and where I'm going to play music, and I can go in early and set up and do a sound check, and naturally it's going to sound completely different than when the place fills up with people. Also, if there are changes in humidity, changes in temperature, um, even changes in barometric pressure have an effect on it. I think musicians are sensitives beyond pretty much any other artist because of the different things that they have to deal with in producing music. There are so many things to work with, and while we say that time is the canvas for creating our music, there are so many other things that become a part of that canvas. Like I'm saying, if there's a lot of humidity in the air, and my guitar is probably going to sound like crap because it's not going to project the way I want it to. It's going to sound like a big fat log. On the other hand, when it's real dry, everything sounds crisp and it sounds good to my ears. So it affects the way I play it as well. What I'm hearing as I'm playing is very important. And if the conditions aren't right, I'm not going to play as well. And the funny thing is, if you do go out and play music in front of people sometimes, the worst night that you're ever having, people will come up in droves and say, "Oh my God, you were so good." And then one night you're just killing it, and nobody says a thing. But it really doesn't matter because you know, as a musician, what was happening. And making music, while a lot of people say, well, making music is for the fans, well, we see what music has turned into today. It has turned into a fan-based art. And that's not really where music came from. Music came from the musician, and the musician makes music for himself or herself. That's really where it's at.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm an artist myself, but I draw, and I see the difference between visual artists and musicians. As a visual artist, I'm very much in my own head, and I'm telling a story and creating characters in my head and then putting them down on paper. But as a musician, it's almost like you guys are transmuting the terrain around you. You have to be perfectly in sync with it. You guys are like alchemists of time. So I really respect that about you guys. I think you're a lot more hooked into the ether, so to speak. I envy that.
Well, I feel that way a lot of the time, but it can get away from you too. So you have to ground yourself. So you have to look at the other ethers, if you will, in order to create a balance among all of these things. And I think that's where a number of musicians have strayed in the past and have become completely absorbed with it, and it will destroy you if you're not careful. Years ago, I wrote a book when I was at BorderLands Sciences called Rhythmic Formative Forces.
Oh.
And do you remember this book? It was all about music, and it specifically dealt with different chapters on the alchemy of music, how sound creates certain patterns in space, how sound can create certain patterns on plates with lycopodium powder spread on them, the Chladni plates.
Cymatics.
Right, and cymatics. There was also an addendum in there, a little pamphlet that I think Tom Brown had found years ago called the Iophone Voice Figures. And it was this woman named Margaret Watts Hughes who had developed these plates, and she, instead of putting powder on the plate, she developed this liquid that she created with different colors, and then she would take a plate, put another plate on top of it, and then she created this device called the Iophone. The Iophone was something that she would sing notes into. It looked like a giant meerschaum pipe, and the plate would rest on top of it. And she would sing into this device, and the patterns would form in this liquid. And then she took photographs of this, and the patterns were completely organic. She could, by her voice, she developed a method that she could reproduce these patterns, and one of them was recreating an almost perfect pattern of a fern. And there were a number of other plants that she could create based on what she was singing. And so that kind of became a part of the theme of the book. So,
wow, I'm actually looking at the cover of your book right now, and just so people understand that it's currently out of print on Amazon, and I can't find a copy anywhere. Do you have this book in PDF? Would you make it available to us? I
I
would love to read it.
yes, I have it. I even posted on my website that I was going to reproduce it in PDF format and just offer it free. I think it was first published in 1995. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that in the very near future.
I'm looking at the chapters here, especially about the alchemy of music, and I'm totally enraptured by it because I, certainly have a deficiency in it, but even more so, I think music is the key to understanding the cosmos and cosmology, and the seven heavens, the seven concentric spheres, the music of the spheres. Do you go into that?
Well, I do go into that quite extensively in the book, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I really read it. But I do know this. One of the things that I got into in the book is that a lot of the talk at uh, let's say in the Baroque era, equal temperament was just coming about, which was a falsification of the tuning of the pianoforte at the time. And the reason for doing that was to be able to play, to modulate from the key of A to, let's say, we're going to go to the key of F. And in order to do that, if we were playing in just intonation, the whole thing would have sounded like a huge mess. So what some brilliant person did is devised a method of tuning the piano so that what you did is you widened the third slightly and you narrowed the fifth slightly so that everything fit into the chromatic 12-tone scale perfectly. So the octaves are perfect, but when you go through that scale, things are falsified. But it sounds good to the ear, and it's so very slight that at first people weren't very accepting of it. But at some point, it started to become commonplace because of the things that you could do with music. Before that, there really wasn't anything called Western harmony. It didn't exist. Harmony did not exist. Music is a very melodic thing. And if you look at other cultures, or you look at Middle Eastern music, or you look at East Indian music, you have nothing but a very melodic progression of the music. There is nothing that necessarily harmonizes with each other, and harmony was never a part of music. So I talk a lot about that and saying that this idea that of the music of the spheres and how there's an 8-tone diatonic scale, there's a 12-tone chromatic scale, all of that came out of Western harmony, and it came from a falsified temperament. And that's why I think that the mixture of the two is great, but you have to remember when you're doing the math on this stuff, it might look like it coincides with something planetary, but it doesn't necessarily do that, and it is based on a falsified temperament. So
You just dropped a bomb on us there, and I'd like to understand exactly what that means. So when exactly did this happen, and what are the real practical ramifications? Were we better off after this or worse off after this?
well, it started in the Renaissance. Probably the 16th century is when it really started, and you saw the development of this idea of counterpoint. What counterpoint is counterpoint literally means note against note. And what people were doing is they were taking two different melodies and they were putting them together and combining them. So this was the first basis of harmony. As the 17th century developed and Bach came around and created these unbelievable masterpieces. He was really responsible for the huge development in equal temperament on the pianoforte. So, in order to be able to play the six-part fugues that he was developing, everything had to be slightly tweaked, which in this case was falsified in order for it to all sound harmonious, hence the name harmony. So it really started to develop in the 16th century, 17th century came about, and that was the 18th century, right around 1750, was probably the absolute pinnacle of the development of counterpoint and Western harmony, and then other composers came about and they started to use it in different ways, which is really interesting. Vivaldi was great too. So how music developed after that, it depends on where you're at, really. If you were in Western Europe at the time, music was completely different than if you were in Northern India. Northern India still maintains a very melodic structure to their music. The harmony has not really crept in to Eastern music. And one of the reasons for that is because Eastern music is still considered sacred. In Middle Eastern music, you have scales that are actually referred to as maqams, and they are a sacred way of playing that scale. There's improvisation involved, but there's a sacred, you have to use certain notes in that scale. Their scale is comprised of 22 notes because there's micro intervals. The Western scale is comprised of 12 notes, which is a chromatic scale. So there's a considerably vast difference. The Western listener is probably not going to hear those micro intervals in Eastern music. That you can develop it, and I studied it for many years, so you actually can develop it. So when you look at how to, take this idea scientifically and this Western musical harmonic structure and put the two together, you can make something out of it. Just like, but you can do that with other musical structures too. It's very similar to a discussion that's recently been going on about the difference between using concert pitch at A 440 cycles per second versus A 432 cycles per second. Which one is more harmonious? Well, there's a lot of video online showing that, well, if we vibrate this plate at 432 hertz as opposed to 440 hertz, we're going to get a much more natural pattern on that plate than we are at 440, and that 440 is disruptive and chaotic. Well, the problem with that is the structure of the plate plays a big part in what the pattern is going to look like. So I can actually create geometrically, I can create a plate that will produce a very natural looking vibrational pattern at 440 hertz. Now, I play in 432 hertz because I think it's more pleasing to the ear, and actually it's just easier for me to do because it's a little bit lower than 440. So that's why I like it. That doesn't necessarily mean that 440 is evil and 432 isn't, though. It's all in your perspective.
Wow, wow. I appreciate that immensely because I've really been looking for some professional guidance on that front. So thank you for that.
That's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily professional, but I would say it's experiential. It's a qualitative difference. And when I was back at BorderLands, my whole thing was about how can we combine quantitative science with qualitative science. Very difficult thing to do because to qualitative scientists, the quantitative scientists are all just looking at mechanistic things. And to the quantitative scientist, the qualitative scientist is a quack, and he's not reproducing anything. He's being sensitive to things. Well, my whole thing about the whole idea behind BorderLands too, and really this goes way back to what BorderLands was founded upon, which is why the name was chosen, is that it's the borderland between the qualitative and the quantitative. If we can look at both of these things and somehow put the two together, then we're going to go in a different direction with science than if we, exclude this or exclude that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's pretty brave work. You make a lot of enemies once you start being open-minded in science.
Well, what happens is that the purely qualitative science people will say that you're nothing but a mechanist and you're working for some government agency, and because I'm saying, well, look, your results aren't reproducible, so I mean, really, as far as the only thing that we were concerned about was having reproducible results. So even in the qualitative realm, we can produce reproducible results. And that was the criteria for saying, okay, if you come to me and you say you've got this incredible healing device, and it heals 50% of the people 50% of the time, that's just not good enough. That is not showing me that there's a reproducible result here. Now, the other argument for that is, well, it actually did heal 50% of the people 50% of the time, so that's a good thing because 50% of those people got healed. Whether or not it was, from whether or not you could actually measure what was going on there. So the quantitative seeks to measure, the qualitative seeks to experience. And let's put the two together. We're still working on that.
That's very beautifully said. The quantitative seeks to measure, where the qualitative seeks to experience. So it's directly tied into consciousness. That's a very powerful combination, and we see this pattern over and over again, where they'll always try to encourage one extreme or the other. If you're either a hardcore mechanistic, atheistic, God-hating, or God-denying scientist, quote unquote, or you're some tree-hugging hippie who's always strung out and just believes in love, 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 love. You'll never ever meet in the middle of the pyramid and achieve true balance. They don't want that. There's obviously something there. So I think your instincts are right.
Well, this is true, but if you're the hippie who's just in a constant haze, I mean, it's so much easier, and it's probably more fun.
It's a lot more fun, I'm sure. I just had a very interesting interview last week with a fellow by the name of Bernhard Gunther, and we were talking. He was talking about. He wrote an extra article and made a video about how these LSD experiences and psychedelic experiences, even marijuana, when people use them as party drugs, they kind of open you up or make you vulnerable to these attacks from spiritual realms. Like there's a way to use them where you're in a sacred space, you have like a ritual elder, and you have a ceremony to ensure that the spiritual entities that surround you are good. But if that's not the case, you can really be attacked. What do you think about that?
Controlled environment, and in the communities that were responsible for introducing hallucinogens always had a controlled environment when they were doing their initiation rituals with those hallucinogens, and I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? Hello?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can hear you. I keep myself muted so I can make sure that everyone hears every word that you're saying, because I don't think people realize who you really are and how much you've experienced. I mean, Tom Brown, you worked with Tom Brown for years, and he taught you just like he's teaching me right now. And you've also
Tom is one of the greatest minds on the planet. There's no question about that. I met Tom in 1986, freshly out of the Marine Corps. I was a radar technician in the Marine Corps, and I was interested in all things electronics. Well, it just so happened that I moved into I moved in with some friends, and it turned out that I was only 2 blocks away from BorderLands Sciences and Tom Brown. And I went to meet him one day, and it wasn't probably a week after that, and we hit it off, and I started working with him. And then we moved the entire operation 14 hours north in Northern California, and we worked on the magazine and worked on BorderLands Sciences from 1986, and I left there in 2000. And actually, in 1995, Tom handed over the reins of BorderLands Sciences to me, and I continued to publish the journal until the year 2000. So many years of doing Borderlands. I think I lost your audio.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
So the whole time there you were learning from Tom, and I'm sure he was learning a few things from you as well. That must have been amazing. I mean, we just don't have real mentors in this day and age anymore, you know?
Very few. Certainly very few. I did have a few when I was at BorderLands Sciences. There I could come up with a list of names. Tom's probably at the top of the list, but there were several people. Of course, Trevor James Constable. There was a woman named Haroldine who did all this research on lithium. You know, I shouldn't even start naming names because I'll forget people. I mean, there were so many influences that really shaped what Borderlands became. It was great.
I'm sure, and just so people understand, you're one of the most well-connected people on the planet when it comes to alternative science. I mean, the people you must have met and the breadth of researchers.
Well, I was at one time, but what happened in the reason I left Borderlands at the time was because I had some offers to go into application development programming, and so I took that offer and decided to leave the Borderlands in hands of the next director. I was actually the fourth director. So it started out with Meade Lane in 1945. Riley Crabb took over in 1959. Tom Brown took over in 1985, and I took over in 1995. And Borderlands Sciences evolved from kind of a spiritual journal to one that was even more esoteric under Riley Crabb, UFOs and the Kabbalah and all of this stuff. And then Tom Brown started to introduce science, a little more science into it, and a lot more Tesla, a lot more of the electrical sciences. And then when I got a hold of it, I was trying to take all of that and utilize all of it and put it all into one big package. And at the same time, like I said before, is that I wanted to see reproducible results. I didn't want somebody coming. I used to get this all the time. People would come to me and say, well, I've got this device, and it does this. I said, well, let's do some kind of a study. Well, no, it just does this. And I said, well, we got to prove this. You can't just say it does this. We got to prove it. And in some cases, people would go along with that. In other cases, they would, then they would label me a traitor to alternative science, and that's why I keep saying we need to bring the qualitative and the quantitative together because they can work together. So.
I understand there's some definite challenges in working in this space.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah. Oh, I know you know that I.
We all had huge challenges going. I mean, every director of Borderlands had all these huge challenges. It seemed like every time we were going to press with a new journal, something would happen. Something weird would come in. Whether it was a some kind of a cosmic intervention. You could put any label on it you wanted, but things would happen, and I'd be sitting there looking up astrological tables and looking to see if Mercury was retrograde or what was going on, and why is this happening right now? Why did the printer lose our master copy? Why did this happen? So
Absolutely.
unfortunately, it's no longer in print, and it hasn't been in print since I think about 2001. But I think that we're looking to actually start where BorderLands left off at that point, and we're going to actually put something new together, hopefully with Aether Force.
God willing. I mean, I'm so proud to just say I know you guys, you, Tom Brown, all the other amazing people that are just coming out of the ether to just join us and looking for a home. People don't realize how many amazing researchers there are in the world that are kind of homeless right now, ideologically speaking.
Yeah, ideologically speaking, right. And there is a problem with a lot of this research that goes on, the technology, the people that are involved in it, getting funds to do the research. What happens to the people who get these funds, whether or not they actually use it for research? I mean, there's all kinds of really strange stuff. I used to call it the call. It doesn't have to be that way either. And really, I see a new beginning. I think that's over. I think that was the past. I think there's a new beginning that's going to happen, and there's going to be a lot more collaboration, and the money will come, and it will be used for the furtherance of creating something better for humanity.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. What we're starting to see here is a kind of unity, and it's a very special kind of unity because it's kind of like La Familia. And I'm old-fashioned. I believe everything has to start with that family kind of mindset, even more than good buddies. We're in this fight together. We have to just enjoy each other. We have to like each other. We have to enjoy each other's company. We have to respect each other. We have to be loyal to each other. That's what family does. Even if you don't like family, even if I don't like you, I'll still respect you and I'll still get your back. And that's really what's going to win this thing for us. People have to understand it really is a spiritual battle.
Well, from your martial arts background, and that you leave the ego at the door, and that's what really creates that family. And it's a concept that not everybody gets or understands, but that's really what has to happen. If I come into the room and I've got a project, I say, no, it has to be this way, and I've got all these other people saying, well, what if you did this? What if you did that? And no, it's got to be this way, and you can't do that. You really have to leave your ego at the door, and that's how that family is created.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Absolutely. It is that leaving that ego at the door that creates that family. That's what my jiu-jitsu teacher would always say. In fact, he had that outside his
right.
store.
I think they all do. They all have the sign that says, leave your ego right here, And that's what's going to further this alternative field, if you will. That's what's going to further how we approach things going forward as far as energy, medicine, everything. It really is.
And this is something I really want to get out to the world, and I can't say this enough. People really don't have an idea of how much is really possible right now. I mean, the amount of stuff that's out there that just borders on the miraculous or is outrightly miraculous that's available to us, that we know about, that we could just really bring to the fore if we just had a little unity. I mean, it can totally change the world in a few days. I mean, that's really how amazing it is. Would you agree?
Oh, I would completely agree. But history says that that's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes, but you just don't know that.
I think it is going to happen in our lifetimes, if I might be so bold, because there. What I real okay, I want to share a personal experience with you. Like when I got attacked by the forces of darkness, it was pretty dark time. Like everyone just bailed out, and all of a sudden I was a giant Negro from Mars, a rapist, Hitler, a neo-Nazi, a homosexual, everything all under the sun. And
Yeah,
no one wanted to talk to me. The one person, however, came to my defense swinging, and that was Tom Brown.
yeah.
And it was he came out like Gandalf coming to save me. Yeah,
That's
that's all.
Tom.
That was Tom. It was totally Tom. I was like, whoa, who is this guy? Like, where did this guy come from? And that was just so inspiring to me. Like, I would never have expected that. And he just kind of appeared. And I think, I think that's what's happening now is we're getting a bunch of really good people, strong of heart, who are coming together and saying, let's just work together. It feels right, and let's help each other. And when that happens, amazing things can happen very fast. It's not just a pipe dream. It
Right.
really is happening. And I'm very, 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 very happy to be a part of that. And there's so many things out there that we know work. Like, I want to ask you, in all your years of research, say you had $100 million right now in funds. What would you do with that? What would you push? Where would you go?
I put it into water. That's it, right there.
I agree completely. So happy to
That
hear you say that.
that is that's the lifeblood of the planet, and it sustains everything on the planet. And without it, nothing happens. Um, there are there's so many offshoots of water technology too that fall into all of the other sciences. I've never seen anything in all the years I've been doing this that brings everything together but water. And I mean, one could spend time working with just a small segment of the science of water, uh, developing, you know, new technologies. It's so vast that one wonders exactly where you jump in. But that's what I would do.
Wow, you're absolutely correct. I have to ask, have you heard our interviews with Mark Leclerc of Nanospire about cavitation?
I haven't yet. There's so much information out there that you have. I haven't gotten to all of it yet, but I'm trying to make time to do that.
Uh, it was so amazing. For like 2.5 hours, he totally blew our minds. Apparently, within the process of cavitation, which is considered an industrial nuisance in a lot of things like propeller blade design, but also considered indispensable to the pharmaceutical industry because they use cavitation to reduce the size of medicine molecules, etc. 80% of our pharmaceuticals are made that way. So this humble process of an imploding water bubble creates everything from excess heat to full transmutation of all known elements and a
Right.
few other effects which are too mind-blowing to even mention. And that's just one process, the little itty-bitty water bubble. Then you have a fellow by the name of Dr. Gerald Pollack and his easy
Mhm.
water research. And that's absolutely mind-blowing as well. It turns out there's a fourth phase of water, and this is
Mhm.
primarily the phase of water that exists in all of our cells. And its ability for energy synthesis and healing is just mind-bending. And then you have Wilhelm Reich and his Bion experiments, and then it's he,
And Dr. Batman Galige, your body's many cries for water. I mean, the research that he did just healing people with just water. There's Johann Gronder's potentization uh, of water and being able to actually take a certain quality of water, add that element to another quality of water, and recreate the quality across these two different types of water. Um, What about
Could you talk a little bit
potentization?
more about Johann Gronder? Because you mentioned him, but I never
Well,
researched him.
it's been a long time, but we used to actually have some products at Borderlands. The first thing that we got was Gronder's. I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but it was a potentization pen, and what it did, it was a device that looked like a pen, about this big. I think it was made out of stainless steel. Inside the device, it had potentized water, and so you could take a regular glass of tap water, put this device in it, and stir it, preferably in a clockwise formation, and stir the tap water, and the water that was inside this pen would impart its energy to the water that was in the glass, and you were able to potentize that water. It would taste, we did numerous taste tests with this device, and I would say it was almost like 80 to 85% of people could tell the difference when you place a regular glass of tap water in front of them and then this potentized water using this device. Now, he had several other devices too, and he was he was a student of Schauberger's work, so um, we know about Victor Schauberger too, and his whole idea on water. But Gronder was, I don't know if he's still around, that's all I know, but we did some experiments with his device, and it was extremely uh, well received.
Wow, wow. I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was reading Dr. Gerald Pollack's book, The Fourth Phase of Water, and he talks about how water is one of the most suppressed areas of science of all time. In fact, it might be even more suppressed than electricity itself. I mean, there were two huge water debacles of in the past 20 years. The one, the polywater charade,
Mm-hmm.
and then the water memory debacle, which sounds a lot like what Johann Gronder was doing. And in both times, they just totally shut it down with just lies and propaganda. And that's not even to bring up cold fusion, which people don't realize happens in water. Water is
Right.
central to the process.
You're absolutely correct, and that seems to be what happens with all of this water research. Somehow homeopathy is still around, but when we talk about potentization, we're talking about a similar process that we're potentizing a substance. And granted, we usually do this with water, but we're potentizing, and there's not even a molecule of the substance left in there, and yet that homeopathic remedy still has an effect, and we know that this has an effect on unbiased subjects because it's been used on animals, and they don't know what you're giving them, and they get healed. So I've been a student of homeopathy for, I don't know, 30 years, and this is a part of this water research. So yes, that's what I would invest in.
I really I will say a prayer that you get $100 million, Mr.
Then we build a team because there's so many people that are so immersed in this research already, and you build a team and you focus on that. I see this all the time too about the privatization of water, and that's a huge problem. And Nestle is taking over, and we're probably going to get in trouble for saying this. I mean, really, that company is taking over and trying to privatize all water by saying, oh, you don't have the right to water, you are going to pay us for it. And, I mean, that's one of the biggest wrongs going on right now. So there's another side of the science, too, just what's going on politically with water. But there's a lot of research to be done there, and that's where I'd do it. That's where I'd start.
That's beautiful. I agree with you completely. We're really pushing that hard. We're thinking of having a symposium soon, maybe around November, and we're focusing it on water, light, and sound.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect.
I think it's a hell of a triumvirate right there. I mean,
Yes,
the secrets of
indeed.
the ether have to be in there somewhere.
Indeed. Yes.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation already. I just want to leave people with an understanding of who you really are, because they don't understand how much you've seen and how much you've experienced and how close you've come to so many various areas of research. I mean, you've jumped deeply into everything from alchemy to communication with biological entities such as plants, to the outside world, to ground radio, to energy synthesis, to I mean, just help. You've
I,
literally done it all.
I forget myself sometimes about all of these different things, and I have to say at this point, and many people have heard his name, but one of my best partners in all of this research, and was a true great friend through all the years I was at BorderLands, was Jerry Vassilatos, and he really kind of directed a lot of what we did with Borderland Sciences, and he was so prolific in his research. There was nobody that can come close to that guy. And so all of these different things with ground radio, biological communications, all the plant research that we did, Jerry and I worked together hand in hand on that. And Jerry was a sensitive, so he would take it in a direction that I might not necessarily take it, because I have all this test equipment set up, and I'm doing the mechanistic side of it, and I'm measuring things, and I want to see what's going on with this plant. And then Jerry would say, well, what if I hold this metal bar next to this plant? What happens? So there was this more qualitative thing. So it was really a great a great working relationship with him, and I think that's where a lot of these things came from. So.
Absolutely. I mean, 7 years, you guys must have had a hell of a chemistry together. I hope we'll hear from Gary again, because he's been MIA for about 15 years now.
Since about 1998, 99, I think. And he respectfully, I haven't tried to contact him or get, or bother him too much, because that was his wish, was to, he wanted to focus on some other things. So that's where we left it. But hopefully he'll come back someday and we can work together.
I certainly hope so.
He can be a part of this great team that we're all moving towards right now.
Absolutely, God willing. I mean, I remember reading some of his work, and like his one paper he wrote on black waves, and he would talk. He's from New York City, so he would talk about how he would stare at a lamppost in the middle of the night on a rainy night, and then he would see these kind of portals of blackness. And when he would stare into them, he'd have this incredible uplifting of consciousness. And I remember the moment I read that, I was like, it hit me with this sense of like deja vu. It was like, and I started to remember when I was a kid, like I was 7 years old, and that would happen to me because I grew up in Columbus Circle. And I remember being at night with my parents after we just finished like putting together the Sunday Times, and I would like all of a sudden spot one of those black portals and look into them, and I kind of be transported somewhere, and there's this guy talking about it, and I was like, wait a minute, did that actually happen?
Yeah. We talked about that quite a bit. We talked about black waves quite a bit. And which I had been researching electrical discharges from the Earth, and so we started talking about the black lightning, different, the opposite of the other energies that we were normally associated with. So we went into that at great length. But the article that Jerry wrote on black waves, that was probably one of the best works he ever wrote. Well, and it's hard to say because he wrote so much.
His 11 volume Vril compendium, which is just a masterwork, and a lot of people don't realize the reason we have that as a PDF right now is because of you, Mr. Theroux. You're the one that got that out to the people, correct?
Well, I published it, but that's all I did. I mean, Jerry spent years of research putting that all together, hanging out in the library night and day. I mean, certainly that must have taken some toll on the poor guy too. I mean, because there isn't anything. It is truly a compendium uh, of this science, and there isn't anything that comes close to it. Nothing that comes close. But yeah, all I did was publish it.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Jerry Valsalatos, for your immense your immense work. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that he was in the New York Public Library back before they stripped it of all the best stuff, the old stuff, and sent it off to some warehouses in New Jersey somewhere. Now it's only got Reader's Digest, But
Yeah,
he was
right.
back then, and he was just spending weeks and days at a time there, just picking up like volumes that were hundreds of years old and delving deep into that work that no one else would even think of doing. Like Jerry Vassalatos, like, is the master class researcher of our times.
He is, then, without question. You can go online and try and duplicate that, and you will never come close to what he did. The funny thing, this is in the age of fax. Every time Jerry found something in the library, he'd fax it to me. My fax machine in the morning would be this giant roll of paper spreading all across the office. And I couldn't wait to get to it. But, I mean, I also had to publish a magazine. I had to do all this other stuff. But it was like this. It was like an ancient scroll from, some cave. And it was absolutely amazing. And he'd do this all the time. So, I think I kept the fax machine going years after they were obsolete just for that.
Before Twitter, you were getting this constant feed of not just bogus crap, but the finest in occult knowledge.
Exactly. Yes. It was definitely the finest. With one sheet of bogusness thrown in, but yeah.
Wow, I mean, that's the stuff that like us seekers kind of dream about, like we all want a Jerry Vassalatos or a Tom Brown or a Michael Theroux in our lives to teach us, to learn from, that there's really no replacement for that, so the more people know about you guys, the better this world will be. I mean, that's real. Like when I look at guys like you, like I see heroes. I'm not trying to, stroke your ego.
Well,
But
no.
I respect that immensely. Like us seekers are now actually getting together. We're kind of leaving our little cubby holes and actually breaking bread with each other. Isn't that amazing?
That's the best part of all of this. I think that we're all going to get together on some level, and we're going to be able to work together on this. And we all, the time is right, and the right people are getting together, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. This has been an awesome talk. I hope we'll do this every week, honestly. I mean, that's the thing I want people to understand. The amount of knowledge that's in your head, the stuff that you've forgotten,
Yeah.
it is more than like everyone else's entire general store of knowledge.
Yeah, there was an awful lot of stuff I'm sure I've forgotten, but I had this stack of journals that I had published over the years, BorderLands Sciences, and I haven't looked at them in maybe 10 years, and I'm going to start. I mean, I published these. I wrote a lot of the articles in them. I did a lot of the experiments. I'm going to go through this stuff again, and I'm going to try and resurrect what I was doing back then, and hopefully work with a lot of other good people to see if we can't bring this back to what it once was and go beyond that.
You certainly have me salivating. I mean, what's old is new again. I mean, you may think that stuff is old news, but it's going to be a breath of fresh air. What if it would hit us right now? If I saw any of those articles on Aether Force right now, I'd be all over them. I certainly am saying my prayers.
Well, there's a lot more to come. I think we can continue to get a lot more stuff out there. I don't know if I can do one of these every week though. I might have to. I don't know. I just don't think I'm going to have to do a lot more reading in between. It's been a while.
Well, I just want people to know something I'm very proud of, that Michael Theroux is an editor on Aether Force, and if I see one article from you a month, I'll be ecstatic. That's all I could ever hope for.
Well, that's easy enough to do.
That's awesome, Mike. It's been an awesome chat. I learned a few things, and I hope we'll see you again sometime real soon. Uh, Hold on. I want people to know a few things about you. You still, what are your websites? Where can people hear your music?
Probably the easiest is just to go to michaeltheroux.com.
Okay.
I do have another one. I've done a lot with computer security over the years, and I have another site called natureonsecurity.com. We have a website that deals specifically with ether sciences, I will say, and it's called explorationscience.org. I think those three are kind of the main ones. I have several other ones. I play in various bands and I do things, but those three are really my main sites.
So people can only hear you live in the state of Wisconsin right now. Is that it?
Live, yeah.
So we're out of luck here in New York, huh?
Yeah, I'm not travel state too much.
Awesome. So michaeltheroux.com, explorationscience.org, natureonsecurity.com, and I just want to give my vote for Mike's music. I've heard one album, Mobus Subterraneus.
Oh yes, Mundus Subterraneus.
Mundus Subterraneus.
That was actually the title was stolen from a book by Athanasius Kircher from about 1635, I believe, and which is all about caloric currents, something that Jerry and I were very much interested in researching. So there's an actual. This is for another time. We can go over that the music that's on there, but there's actual VLF recordings of earthquake events that were mixed into the music.
I remember being completely mesmerized by just two of the songs that I heard there. It's just absolutely amazing, that album. I'm gonna load it up again tonight before I go to sleep and see what happens.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, it's been awesome. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We can see you guys sometime soon.
Thank you, Tech Z, for all the work you're doing. It's brilliant, and let's keep working together. This is fantastic.
And thank you for building this foundation, this home that we're all kind of living in right now and starting to redecorate.
Yeah.
We'll forget that. Peace, everyone. Bye. May the force be with you.